Welcome, everyone, to episode 8 of the Real Profit, Real Perspective podcast. No sales, no business. I'm Connor Malatesta, managing partner at Markoff and Malatesta CPAs, and I am joined by my favorite person named Ryan, who lives in the southern part of the country. Ryan Bannister, owner of One Up Advisors. Ryan, how you doing today?
Awesome, man. This is quickly becoming my favorite part of the week. So,
Isn't it great getting away from doing actual accounting work to do something a little more creative where we
so
don't have to
great.
sit and stare at numbers and try to divine their secrets?
I know, right? It's awesome. And now we get to talk about the lovely world of selling that accounting work and work in
You know,
general. So,
I mentally I went back and forth on what to really call this episode, and I think at the face of it, it seems like a stupid title. Well, of course, if you don't have sales, you don't have a business. I mean, that seems pretty self-explanatory, but one thing that I've talked about, particularly with new business owners, and I believe at some point in one of our earlier episodes, I had said that, when you're a new business owner, when you're solo entrepreneur, you don't have the luxury of being bad at sales. And I think what I really wanted to kind of talk about today was less the idea of, okay, everybody knows if you don't have money coming in, because obviously everybody remembers the fundamentals of money in has to exceed money out. We already talked about that multiple times, so obviously everybody remembers. But moving beyond that basic idea that is relatively common sense unless you're a startup. What does sales really mean? And why is it something that when you really think about that transition from a worker doing something you set out on your own, what it really means when we say to somebody, you do understand if you don't have sales, you don't have a business. And I wanted to start by asking you, how's it been doing sales, particularly because you are at that kind of solo entrepreneur level? How's it going?
yeah, well, feast or famine is all I have to say. So, but it has been a journey for sure. And starting out, so to recap for anyone who hasn't heard episode 0 or anything like that yet, our background. So for me, I started my firm about 3 years ago. I think actually a couple days ago was the actual 3-year anniversary, now that I think about it. But
Welcome, congratulations, you're three
yeah,
years old
thank
now.
you. So over those 3 years, my sales experience and process have drastically changed. So, thinking back on it now, like when I first started, I almost had a if you build it, they will come sort of attitude. Like this concept that I knew there was a need and a demand for, but lost in translation, sort of that, I guess, go out and get the work type of thing with, website and online marketing and things like that. You think you can just kind of put stuff out into the ethos and the work will come. Or like just the fact that you've built this business, people are going to give you their business, right?
Well, I've built it. I'm entitled to have, people come and pay me to do things. What do you mean I got to work for it?
Yeah. Well, and being in a service business, even if you're a product like manufacturer or something, but like for me, I'm really good at this stuff. So you just think that that translates to people understanding that and wanting to work with you, but there's not that one-to-one translation there. And I think it's a very obvious thing, but I think putting it into practice is more difficult as far as conveying your value to customers and clients, like why what you do matters to them. For my business, for example, I mean, nobody cares that I'm really good at this or that we can, do QuickBooks better, faster than anyone else. And, I'm not making that claim by any means, but, whether you're building like the fastest thing or the best thing, no one really cares until you translate that to them directly. Like, this process will help you save this amount of time or this amount of money. And that's when you really start to, I think, make it like link the value in people's heads. So it took me at least the better part of the first 2 years probably to really start understanding that. And I mean, most recently it's really started to click, and my close rate is going up like from what it was, at least 50 to like 67% of prospects that come through the door closed, which is what I want to keep it
Mhm.
at. So I'm really happy with where things are right now, but that's not to say there's always something that I can improve in sales conversations. There's definitely things I'm still improving in the process itself. And past that, once a client signs on, you still have to onboard them. Like, that's when the experience really starts, like
Mhm.
square one. So, it's a process, but it's been a journey that I'm pretty satisfied with thus far, because coming from, a background starting in public accounting, like, I had literally zero sales experience, and then moving to corporate finance at a large hospital, I got even less sales experience. At
Right.
least in
Yeah.
public, the partners kind of sales conversations that you hear across the hall like bleed over to you, kind of. But yeah, you know,
I
it
remember those conversations you're talking about.
us sitting in the same office and just kind of giggling and
Oh man, I was really glad they had thin doors.
oh yeah.
If our former boss is actually listening to this, hello.
Hey, thank
we
you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, hey, it was a really good learning experience. Definitely informed a lot of what we're doing. We wanted to do this sales episode off the end of the previous episode, which is about communication, because fundamentally, when you get down to it, right? If we want to get down to what sales really is, it is the process in which you communicate to another person why they should pay you. That is it. That is, you are communicating, there's a lot of fancy words out there for, the value proposition or the value add or the service or the this and the that. Fundamentally, at its core, you are attempting to communicate to another person who has money that you would like to receive why they should pay you for whatever it is. And, that was when I was getting started. I got started doing a lot of work on Upwork in the middle of the pandemic, which was, beneficial because everybody was remote. But that's where it really drove home. I got started doing QuickBooks cleanups and stuff like that because I had about 2 years of experience, a CPA license, and no defined really work history or work portfolio or things to talk about where I couldn't say, yeah, I've been doing this for 10 years. Didn't really have that. There was a kind of a distinct lack of time. And I believe I'd been on another podcast talking about my becoming a CPA and all that. And I think it kind of came up, but it was I got introduced firsthand to same sales problems that you did. Although I think ours ended up being just a little bit different because you had more experience to kind of pull from in this to talk about how long you've been doing things and seeing and stuff like that.
Right.
Where I had to kind of figure out, how do I sell myself, how do I communicate my value without being able to usually rely on the first thing that people like to talk about, which is how long they've been doing something? Because we all have that innate, well, if you've been doing it for a while, you probably know what you're doing. If somebody says to you, yeah, I've only been doing this for 6 months, you're like, I don't know if, you're going to have to work harder to to sell me on that idea of why I should give you money. And we said in a previous episode that when you're, and we wanted to start as from the perspective of the solo entrepreneur, the new business, the one man shop, and we over the course of this, we're going to kind of build up to what it's more like when you're part of an organization. But when you're the only one, as I know, and you know that I know, you don't have the luxury of being bad at sales, which is
Nope.
what the whole point of the title is, because if you don't have sales, you don't have a business. So when you want to go out into the great wide world and engage in the beautiful game of capitalism, sales is how you compete. And if you are bad at it, guess what? You don't get to enjoy being a business for long. 6 months goes by, nothing happens, you're out of savings, you go find a job. And that is a struggle for a lot of new business owners. It was a struggle for you. God knows it was a struggle for me to get comfortable standing there, or in this case, sitting on a video call, which I know is how a lot of ours go, and basically saying to the other person, this is why I think you should pay me money because this is my value. And a lot of people in the beginning, and it's a normal part of the process because it's a skill you've got to practice and refine, are not good at that. But the ones that make it work on it. They identify, you don't have to start a business and be amazing at sales. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is you have to get better. You got to fucking work on it, or you're not going to be around for long.
Yep.
I'm thinking of a couple in particular, a couple prospects that I had talked to, new business owners, where they basically said, I'm not good at sales. I'm not good at that kind of thing. It's not really what I do. And funny enough, they had been running serious losses in their business for quite a while. It's like, look, I know in statistics correlation doesn't mean causation, but I could pretty much tell you that that was part of the problem. Well, I'm just not good at this. Yeah, so what do you think? People are supposed to pay you? You saw firsthand if you have that expectation of, well, I'm amazing. Obviously, they want to work with me. What do you mean no one's emailing?
Yeah. And that relates directly to my own experience in it. And I think it was about 6 months ago now, like October ish of 24. I started a sales training course that was a couple months long. It was pretty intensive, maybe even longer than that. But that's really when things started to click for me. And it goes back to exactly what you're saying. Like, up to that point, realized there is something not working in this business. And it's me because I am not that great at sales. So I need to go improve on that. Or if you're not willing to do that, you go hire somebody. But for me, I took that course and it helped a ton, and sort of like you were just getting into, it helps you convey your value in the things you do. But I think the most important part for me was linking that into people's what they care about and why that matters to them. You can say all day long, like, my process is going to save you this much time, but nobody even really cares about that. I think you have to take it a step further and say, almost to their feelings or their goals, like, you will save this much time by doing X with us, and that will then reduce your stress levels and free you up to go do other things rather than focus on like the bookkeeping or whatever that we're solving for you.
I mean, one of my favorite things, particularly because at the core of a lot of what you and I both do is saving people time. And I could probably talk for a while. We'll get into it later because a lot of the sales for the part of the work for the firm that I oversee has not been where I would want it to be. Mostly because we don't have the looming specter of the IRS hanging over, the work that we're trying to sell. Super easy to sell tax work, particularly when you have an amazing rock star tax team that saves people a ton of money in taxes. Turns out that, to a certain extent, sells itself, but mostly because everybody understands the idea of getting a bunch of money back from the government because everybody loves a refund.
And
But I
that you
have
have to do it.
yeah, it's one of those of it's government, it is pure compliance work, but we can make it, better than everybody else. And, they are amazing at what they do, which makes it really easy to sell the work because they can follow through on all the promises. But with what we do, we have to be a little more, the mental picture we have to paint has to be a little more clear. And one of my, this is going to sound incredibly sociopathic, but let's face it, going through this whole thing when you're communicating value, there is an element of manipulation to it. Doesn't mean it has to be bad. See, we said are going to get real. Let's really get into it. Is having whoever I'm talking to, trying to get them to not just think of, the time savings, but really, telling them, imagine not having to sit there and do this work. Imagine what you would do having that entire Friday free to do other things. And usually, once we start getting into that, that's where we get more of the resonance of not just, yeah, you're going to save 6 hours, but imagine your Friday, you get to just not work and you can go do whatever you want because you have given those problems to us and now you get all that time back. And then that gives more of a visceral sounds too strong, but maybe that's the appropriate word here. It's more of a visceral reaction to it than just, by engaging us, you will save 5 hours a week in time, and over the course of a month, you have saved 20 hours. And people go, okay, cool. That becomes effectively meaningless to me. But when you sit there and tell them, imagine not having to sit there and do this anymore, they go, man, that would be nice. You go, yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, here's the quote.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the transition I had to make in my head is, sales and what it means to be a good salesperson isn't being able to like take this coffee mug and sell it to you right now or
Mhm.
like pick up any random object and sell it to you. It's being able to one, find the right people who are interested in the product or service and then walk them through that logic to get there, and that's sort of like you hint on the manipulation side of things. I call it guidance to certain objectives,
It's
It's
the yin and the yang of the
yeah,
situation.
but that's been like a really successful piece of it for me is asking more and asking better questions in sales conversations rather than just regurgitating my like website copy to
Mhm.
somebody. And I really liked what you mentioned about that with, you know, even asking the person that you're in the conversation with, like, what would a successful relationship between us look like? Or what would that free you up to do? And then they say it themselves. And you can work with that, from there and say, like, this will do that. Or either it won't. Like, if it doesn't, we're not a good fit. And we go from there, you know?
So what's been something, because you mentioned you went through that sales course, and so from that, what was, if somebody's listening to this and wants a key takeaway from that, like the most clear kind of condensed bit of advice you would give from that, what would you really say that was that you took away from that course?
Yet collaboration. So having your sales conversations be collaborative with the prospect or this I guess probably more service business related rather than maybe selling a product, I don't know, but this is just my experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I had said, asking questions and being genuinely interested in the conversation with, why is this person seeking out financial planning or bookkeeping? What's like the root cause of that? And what information can I learn from this like two-way conversation between us of how I can help you, if
So
I'm
really,
explaining that well enough.
I think let me see if I can spark notes it because I think I know what you're getting at. Really, you're what you're saying is taking the idea of a sales call, right, and moving it. The kind of the epitome of the terrible part is the used car salesman, right, who's just going to try and sell you every lemon that they have on the lot because they want to make their commission. But
Yep.
kind of taking the sales process of talking to a prospect and turning it into more of a let's work together to figure out what problems you have and how we can solve those problems. And I think even if you're selling product, for example, or service regardless, that really kind of fundamentally gets at what the whole communication is about and where when you look at snappy marketing, I think the companies that do it really well, that's kind of fundamentally what they're able to touch on. I think anyone who's ever seen Shark Tank and has some the inventor of this new product comes up and says, I've got this new product which is salad tongs for when you drop your spoon in your soup, and everybody sits there and goes, why did you come up with that, and what makes you think anyone's going to want to buy that? You have basically come up with a solution looking for a problem. And whether somebody is buying a widget, a thing, whatever, or dealing with a service, that's kind of the core part of the relationship. And I think, and this is more of a piece of advice for the newer business owners, is sales becomes a lot less intimidating when you think about it, not from the thought process of I'm trying to get your money, but I'm trying to help you deal with this problem. And
Yes.
when you tweak the framing that that's what you're trying to do and that is what you're actually trying to do, then it really is like you said, that collaborative effort of I'm trying to work with you to deal with this, to solve these problems. I'm providing value to you. Please pay me for that value.
Yes, dude, 100%. And I think even a better way for me to boil it down is basically you don't have a sales pitch. Like you're not pitching somebody with a slide deck in there that you're regurgitating just facts, right? Like, I mean, you can use a slide deck, but like you're not just spitting facts or random quotes at somebody to say, this is about me. Like you're working with them to work through their problems and concerns to see if we're a good fit to work together.
Now, let me ask you this. How do you identify weaknesses in your sales process, your sales pitch going through that? How have you looked at what you've been doing and first identified what's not working, and then how did you fix that? Because I'm sure anyone who goes through this, particularly when you're doing it in the beginning, not even in the beginning. If you're doing sales, there's a reason why nobody ever has a 100% lead to consult to conversion rate, because you're gonna have things that you mess up or don't resonate, and it's a constant process. So how do when you're learning how to get better at sales, how do you self-assess to make it better?
That's a great question. And so from what that was one great product from my sales training course was a framework to
Mhm.
assess those things in and like that should guide you through this conversation. So the best tip from that would be to have some sort of framework for yourself, like where the customer comes in and where you want to take them. But like for me, I know just from like recording conversations on Zoom, which is a great feature because I can go back and watch them.
Mhm.
I have a tendency to information dump on somebody when they ask a question or raise a concern. Like if they ask like how we deal with 401ks or I don't know, some easy question, I'll have a tendency to like give them all the knowledge that I know about this thing rather than link the important parts to like what they actually are asking. Or, if somebody's asking a question, that's probably not their real concern. Like there's something behind that question that they're trying to get some extra information on, like trust in you or things like that. So, going back to your question, I think one, recording calls has been really helpful because I can watch myself. I can also share that with um, other people who are working on their sales processes as well. So I've been doing that. Like we review calls together. I'll watch other people's sales videos and say like, how does this follow what I would do, or where could they have improved and things like that. So I think it's sort of like improving any other process. Like you have to have that framework that you want to hold it to, and it's not like an ambiguous uh, blob of information. you know.
I'm going to push you a little bit here. How do you identify the parts that you think didn't work? So even at just the beginning, because I honestly think you may have a more refined structure to this than I do, because you mentioned having a framework, and I'm sitting here going, do I have a framework? Or have I just been shit? I probably should go back and watch what I've done previously, because I'll be honest, I've never done that. That's a good idea.
It's tough.
I mean, yeah, it's taken a bit here just to get used to the sound of my own voice, which I think is part of the reason why I hadn't done that. But it turns out you spend enough hours
Yeah.
editing these videos and or these audios, and it you kind of Stockholm syndrome yourself to not hating the sound of your own
Yeah.
voice.
You will cringe.
Oh boy, the cringe is real. But how do you actually identify what you think the problem was? Let me phrase it this way. You mentioned data dumps, right? How did you identify that that was a problem?
So I think that goes back to partly to the framework that I'm working within. So I'll talk about it a little bit, just a brief overview. So it's called the WIFIT system. It's WIIFT. So I even have my handy, well, for those on audio, you won't see this, but I even have like a brochure here of a little pamphlet of the process to walk through.
Man,
So,
you have so
yeah.
much more than I have. look,
So
look at you with your fucking brochure.
I know, man. Yeah, it's the 5-step process like printed on a trifold like brochure thing. And the biggest step in this process is the second I, which is investigate. So that's where you are.
I'm going to stop you. What does with it mean?
Oh, that's a good question. It means what is in it for them with a capital T. So them being the
Mm.
prospect.
It's important to have that capitalized because that makes it snappy.
Exactly. So, and that goes back to like the collaborative
Mhm.
aspect of the whole thing. And when you're investigating like what the person's needs are or what their problems, what their wants are, you're asking questions, you're actually listening to what they say, and then following up on like asking follow-up questions on those things to just get an idea of how you can take them from this step to a yes or a no. So going back to watch videos of myself, that framework is really helpful to kind of grade myself on what I did. And like when I information dump on people, I'm not asking follow up questions to get an idea of what their real concern is. I'm trying to like, make them think that I know what I'm
More
talking
about
about.
showing off than
Right.
really, did
Right.
you notice a correlation between the meetings in which you would info dump onto the prospect and the fact that the engagement wouldn't close and you wouldn't pick them up as a client?
Yeah, definitely. And even not, it's not like 100%, but I think about it from sort of like a marginal return perspective. Like I don't have to follow this framework 100% to a T, but as long as I'm doing half of it or like 80%, even 10% of it, it's better than what I was doing when I was doing nothing. And
You mean
I,
you weren't having a lot of success as you were sitting there waiting for people to just show up and give you money and say, please be my financial advisor?
yeah, well, and then when people would show up, I was just kind of winging the conversations and didn't really have the I don't know, the confidence or the knowledge or experience at that point to even know how to get them from like random person who walked in on the website to a client. It's like half of it at that point it was just like pure luck, honestly. So, you
I
know,
mean, hey, there's an element of luck in everything. I'm sitting here doing self-reflection on my process, and God, you've got a lot more structure to it than I do.
yeah, and I like that talking through that too made me think, at first when I was sort of winging those conversations, my thought was, hey, if there's anything I can sell, it's myself and trust in me as a person because
And
I'm
did you?
genuinely here to help these people. And I think that is what landed and that's what connected with my first
Mhm.
clients before I started getting into this whole thing. So I think like that's where the transition is from like first day new entrepreneur, you are thinking of yourself as the product. And I think as your process matures and you learn a bit more, your business becomes the product. Like not even just the service itself, but your whole business and like how you give them the client experience.
I was just getting ready to say, yeah, the whole experience, not just the particular service.
Right. Right. And I think like, that's sort of where I wanted to take this with questions for you, is like going from the solo, like your first day to solo entrepreneur, then you are, you find yourself in this firm the state that you are now with employees and
Hmm.
this place you are now where you're starting to systematize more and I think your business is the product at this point versus like when you first started and you were.
Yeah.
So like can you tell me more about that?
So I want to start all this with a disclaimer that I think I have a tendency to be a lot more improvisational in how I do things than you do. I just to be totally honest, even now at this point, through a lot of the way we now do sales and everything, it still has a large element of Im- to say it's improvisational sounds really terrible, but there is a significant variation in that I don't have things nailed down to a science. A lot of what I've done over the last 5 years is, and this has just been what kind of naturally occurred to me or what seemed to make sense. I probably, for full, I probably should have done more research on formal sales structures and things like that when I was starting and going through all of it. But there's a good part of my personality that's just like you know what? We're gonna do it and we'll see what happens. Going back into, making decisions is an incremental thing. I pretty much used that as my guiding star the entire time of I'll just do something and see what happens. So, I haven't reviewed my own recordings or sat there and studying it in detail. It's been a lot of mostly trying to correlate close rate with what do I talk about, and when I'm talking to people, do I notice trends in the things that make them go, oh, I'm really interested in that. Particularly, for example, take something like bookkeeping, which is boring as shit. There is not a person on the planet that becomes overjoyed at the thought of doing bookkeeping. If they are, please submit an email us so that I can give you a job.
Yeah, honestly, bookkeepers don't even get that excited about
No,
it.
spoilers. We do it because it pays the bills every month, not because of some overwhelming joy of God. I love categorization. Going in and adding a label to things. Oh, it's better than drinking. Usually it's I got to go in and add labels to all these things. I'm going to start drinking. So my whole thing is, when I got started, has been very much a fluid process because it's been, like I kind of mentioned earlier, how do I get started selling myself when I can't talk about what I've done? How do I communicate that value and talk to the prospect that I'm dealing with? And it took me years to really understand. I'm going to be honest, it took me longer than you. It probably has only been within the last year that it really kind of clicked what it is we are really selling. So, you can go apparently 4 years in business and growing each year without really understanding truly what it is your customers want. So if you're sitting there going, I don't know, it's like you're not alone. It took a long time to really figure out what service we're selling, what does the a counterparty really care about. And the only way to really get that is through experience of dealing with a ton of people. I think part of why I'm terrible at systematizing something like this is that I tweak my messaging every call. I am constantly, and I this part I do think has really helped in that it has kept me from getting kind of stuck in a rut of this is the one way I have to talk about things.
Hmm.
It does make it difficult to kind of really compare back and see, if I had to compare data points, what worked well, what didn't work well. But I kind of got started with the mindset of each new person I talk to, each new business, each new sales opportunity is a new opportunity to refine my sales pitch. I've now been doing sales for 5 years and have done hundreds, if not thousands of calls. Probably not thousands, but I wouldn't be surprised if I was in the low thousand amount at this point. Um, and each one has just been an opportunity to tweak things a little bit more, a little bit more. Did they like this? Did they not like this? And now that we are a full firm, it's the challenge has been less about how do I talk to people because I've gotten pretty good at it at this point. Practice makes perfect. You constantly refine it. You get pretty good at talking to people. What ends up happening is that now I have employees, we have our wonderful professionals that are out trying to sell the firm. So, how do I take what we do, what I'm doing, because fundamentally, when you take our firm, for example, what it boils down to at its core is what is Connor Malatesta on the financial services side selling and doing, and what is Matt Markoff on the tax side doing? Because everything else we do, all the, the people that we have, the processes we put in place build around those two cores. So now it becomes, how do we take teams, for example, that don't do this particular type of work and train them enough to understand this is what the clients are going to care about? So a lot now becomes a, I don't have my professionals, or even any of our professionals to a certain extent, for at least for me, just because I still hold on to this because I'm selfish, doing the concrete pricing for stuff, because they just don't know. What we've done is, their job is to make the connection with the client and just try and get an understanding and ask questions of what do they have going on, to find out more contextual information, and then basically warm them up enough so that they are open to having a meeting with me, where then I can go into more detail. I'm not expecting them to be able to sell the whole host of services of everything that we do and identify all those needs, because they don't have the same level of understanding and expertise that we do. Just like I don't know all the little minutia of what a client needs from a tax perspective, in the context of the tax returns and how all of those work, because it's not the world I live in. I just make sure I know enough to understand when they're going to have problems and I can pass those off. And then it's getting everybody else just to the point to where they can kind of funnel that back to me, and then we can close it that point. And when you have something to say, because I'm getting ready to go into a whole other thing here.
No, I just wanted to point that out. I liked that you threw that in there, the funnel word, because that's what I was thinking is like almost your employees are the top of funnel and it all comes down to you eventually where you are making the final kind of quote or proposal and then go from there. But
Because ultimately at the top we are responsible for everything, and this has played, to go a little more concrete into what we do. This is part of why I wanted to have a virtual accounting firm, is that, speaking of sales, you are always limited by your geographical presence and what you've got going on. And marketing and advertising and all this stuff can expand that. But when you're, for our little example here of talking about professional services, it very much is a relationship driven type thing. And a lot of times you're limited to the area that you're in. And so I said, why? I live in rural Michigan. I know, for starters, I'm not going to find qualified CPAs in this area to hire. No offense to some of the other ones that are in this area, but I also know that they're not looking to leave jobs. We're not particularly flush with a bunch of accountants in rural Michigan. So why would I limit myself to just trying to find things here when I can have a virtual workforce that gives us presence in different areas of the country, and basically allows us to touch areas and try and make connections with people that normally we wouldn't be able to, because the extensions of the firm, which in this case is the professional staff that are out there doing all of this, are in different areas, which gives us more opportunities to pull in clients. This is more like sales tactics, or strategy, I think would be the better word here. But that's been part of it, where their job is to go out and talk to people and have enough understanding of what's going on to then funnel to the experts. And when you make that move from a solo entrepreneur to a real business, and you're not the only one doing sales, what becomes important at that point is to identify, okay, can I have defined pricing for things? Contractors, for example, are always big into pricing, labor, material, et cetera, that kind of thing if you're using
right.
other people. Services, having an understanding what's it going to cost me for, to pay people to, to do this stuff. But when you're putting those kind of quotes together and that having where it does get a little more systematized in how do we come up with the numbers, particularly if you hit that point where you want to have other people selling for the business entirely, you don't want to just rely on their judgment for things unless you know, yes, they've been doing it for 20 or 30 years, in which case, okay, they can just kind of go on their own. But in general, that's where you have to give them more structure, probably more of a framework like you're talking about for how do we come up with these things. I can play more loosey goosey with it just because of the experience and understanding the economics of the firm, what it's going to take, what all of our costs are. But when I have other people out doing that, they don't know all that same information. And so you either have to define it in such a way that they can be given a checklist or a streamlined guide or something that walks them through how to do it, that this is the methodology we have to follow, or they have to then funnel to you so that you can be the final decision maker of this is what we've got to charge for things. And we still, even though we have that kind of process going on, things like pricing and the sales pitch and all of that, or identification of new services, is still a constant thing that we're doing. I'm still constantly looking at, are people liking what we're saying, not liking what they're saying? Is pricing becoming a problem? All of that stuff. I mean, once you've moved and gotten comfortable, and one thing I'm going to toss a little bit of a nugget of wisdom here right at the end. One thing I have noticed is that generally when you're starting out and you're growing through this, you will the amount of zeros after the invoice has a correlation to basically how uncomfortable you are going through that process and how kind of easy it is. When you get started, asking for $500 may be terrifying. You do that enough, you don't mind anymore. Then you take it to the next step. 5 grand may be a large project where you're sitting there going, man, I can't believe somebody's going to pay me this much. Then
Yep.
suddenly you have more of those coming through and you get used to those numbers and somebody wants to know, hey, what's it going to cost? You toss out $7,500 like it's nothing, not a big deal. But then you have something bigger comes through. Now we're talking about 20, 30, 40, $50,000. And again, you're getting nervous and it feels really weird to ask about it. And you got to go through a whole bunch of those before you get comfortable. It's a weird, every time you go through like a power of 10 in your billing, it's almost like a new mountain that you have to ascend to get used to. And then you look back and go, man, I remember when I was nervous about asking for $300, and now I won't do work if it's only worth
Yep.
$300. And it's just this constant, everything builds on itself, and suddenly you look back and you go, when the hell did I get good at this? How did that happen? But I mean, and we've seen, now that we're talking about more established businesses, I think the other biggest mistake I've seen a lot of businesses make once they become established is assuming they have a process in place, they have their pricing figured out, that stays static. And it doesn't. You never know when economic conditions are going to change, when your industry conditions are going to change, when macroeconomic shocks are going to kick you in the teeth. There's a lot of businesses out there that are freaking out. This is just not to make it political, but because it is topical. During the time of recording this, the Trump tariffs are big in the news, and there's a lot of uncertainty as to what's going to happen. I actually had a phone call with a client earlier this week who has had a serious hit to his sales because he's in construction and the tariffs have raised costs so much that
Mm.
the people looking to have work done have basically stopped for a bit to try and figure out what's happening. And sometimes you hit stuff like that and it doesn't matter how good your sales process is or what else you've got going on. You're just shit out of luck. And that's where at one point we'll have an episode on, control the controllable, but that's just something that may happen that's out of your control. Is who would have seen a trade war suddenly, happening and then having to take that into account? And now the pricing that you thought you had figured out has to adjust because costs are going up or people aren't willing to pay as much because they're scared. And now you sit there and go, okay, do we hold out for the people that are going to pay at the rates that we had set before, or do we start dropping because having a little bit less profit is better than having no profit at all? And
Yeah.
it's a constant, it takes constant upkeep, constant reevaluation, and particularly these days with how quickly things can change, if you get caught lacking, you're gonna get in trouble.
Absolutely, man. I think that kind of goes back to I think what both of us were saying, like with you constantly iterating on things, and same here. Like you're always looking at what the customer needs, and that drastically changes when economic or whatever other outside conditions change.
Mhm.
So you have to be fluid and adjust with those changes.
There is a lot of it that I will say does, in my experience, does turn into a game of statistics, where you never know in any one particular sales incident what the deal breaker really was, unless it's something blatant like burned their house down and then they opted not to go with you. Okay, we can probably say that, that was it. But you're always playing a game. It really is at its core a guesstimate game. The large
Yep.
companies spend a lot of money attempting to sift through data to find insights into changes in sales patterns. I'm going to assume that pretty much anyone that is listening to us is not sitting at the upper management of a really large business that has unlimited funds to pour into sales and market research for what's going on. Instead, you're going to be dealing with the constraints that probably we have, which is the only way to really kind of figure out what's going on is to compare every sales opportunity with another one and see what worked, what didn't, what do we need to tweak. Okay, we're not sure
Yep.
if this is the root cause. We don't know if pricing is it, but maybe we need to just tweak it a little bit for the next few to see, are they going for it or are they not, or what's happening. And it is a, I'd almost call it a game of inferences, because you're trying to infer from the behavior of the counterparty, who is probably not going to be completely honest with you. They never are. Sometimes you're lucky to get a response when somebody says, no, I don't want to do it. Instead, you feel as if you're screaming into the void, begging for a go, no go from them. And then you go, well, if it's been 3 months, this probably isn't happening. And then they
Yep.
show up 6 months later and you're like, are you fucking kidding me? Um, but it's always a game of inferences where you're always the biggest hangup, I think, that can really get a lot of people is being afraid to make a change because they're not sure if it's the right one. You're not going to know. And the only way to really find out is to make those tweaks. You can make educated guesses, then you make your change and see what happens and then readjust from there. That's why I treat every sales opportunity as a new iteration. Whether I'm going with
Yep.
tone or the way I'm selling services or how I'm talking to the client, each one is a new opportunity to play with it a little bit. And given enough time, you collect enough data, either consciously or subconsciously, to kind of figure out, all right, what do we need to do?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I'll be the one to make a sports reference here, but growing up playing baseball, like coaches would always say you got to have a short memory from pitch to pitch. Like if you're batting, you can't even think about the last one. You just got to look at the next one and stay in that zone and make changes where you need to. So I think that's pretty relevant here.
It's weird how the process going from just being you to having an organization both changes a lot, but still has to obey, as usual, the same fundamental rules.
Yeah.
It mostly becomes a game of how does the information flow through. And a lot of times, when you're building from the ground up, you already kind of know what you need. And so you just turn into, okay, how do I make sure I know enough of what's going on to keep eyes on the people who are supposed to be doing sales? And how do we know if we're having problems and stuff like that? Or, sales are down. What's really driving that? Is it industry trends? Is it us just, shitting the bed? What really is it? Industry downtrends are the absolute worst to have to deal with, because then you're talking, it's almost outside of your control, and then those conversations get really really fun. But I mean, that's why
Yep.
ultimately, that's why we titled this episode What We Did, is that these are the things, regardless of where you're at, you have to do if you want to keep the business going. That is it. You have to, if you don't have sales, you don't have new work coming in, not going to have a business for long.
Rule number one, you got to make money and you got to have sales to make money.
Yeah, it's amazing how long, or not how long, if you're not making money and just burning through it, banks will eventually say you're not allowed to spend our money anymore. We're gonna go give
Yep.
that to other people that
You're
know
living
how
on
to.
borrowed time or borrowed money or both.
Yeah, usually both.
Yep.
But I think our episodes here keep
Awesome.
creeping up in time.
Yeah.
But I think this does a little good wrap on kind of a high level, what you got to do and the realities of sales here, kind of regardless of what point you're at. So we will hopefully see everybody in next episode that we have planned out, unlike some of our other ones. What does it really feel like to make progress? We'll see you all then.